Hello, good morning, and welcome to Smiley Talk on Ending Homelessness. So we have a fantastic panel lined up for you today. We have 4 speakers, and we're going to be discussing the misconceptions when it comes to homelessness, but also the solutions that work. And we're going to get some insight from Finland as well, as we have a Finnish speaker with us today. But before we go into that, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief overview of Smiley Movement. So we are a non-profit. We're sponsored by the original Smiley brand. I have the huge smiley face behind me. And we are on a mission to inspire people to drive forward positive change in the world. So we want to inspire people to take action, however small that may be, and strive towards the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So they really are our North Star. Through our talks that we do and our Smiley news that we publish, we align everything with these goals and sort of highlight the people that are striving towards them too. So today we're streaming live on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. And if you do have any questions for our speakers, feel free to pop them in the comments and they will be fed through to us and we will get them and try and ask our speakers them nearer the end of the hour. But without further ado, I feel like I need to hand over to our speakers now to hear more from them. So I'm going to come to all 4 of you here and I would love to know if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are, but also where your passion for working in ending homelessness and sort of striving towards it came from. So Lord Bird, you are first on my screen, so I'm going to come to you first. Can you introduce yourself to the viewers here and tell us a bit about where your passion for this topic came from?
My name is John Bird. I am the founder with Gordon Roddick of the Body Shop of the Big Issue. So I founded the Big Issue with him 30 years ago, and it's still going. And it helped start street papers all over the world and built a kind of international movement. My passion for homelessness probably started when I was 5, when I was homeless, and probably again when I was 6, when I was homeless, and then 7 when I was homeless, and then 13, 15, 17, 22. So my passion for homelessness, to do something about it, has come from me being a part of the problem of homelessness and deciding later on in life to be a part of the solution.
That's great and great, valuable insight that we're going to have from you during this discussion. Thank you. Liz, I'm going to come to you next. So can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and your passions for this topic?
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm the Policy and Research Manager at St Mungo's. So St Mungo's is one of the largest homelessness providers in England. So my passion, I guess, has evolved over time. So I started my career working in frontline mental health and then moved into policy work in the drug space. And I became passionate to work for St Mungo's and move into the homelessness space after the Everyone initiative, which St Mungo's played a leading role in. And I think what that really showed us is that when it comes to rough sleeping, it can be ended. We essentially ended it during the Everyone initiative by getting 90% of people off the streets into accommodation. And it just really inspired me to move into that sector and to do more on this issue.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Juha, what about you? Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us more about your background?
Yeah, hello everybody, good to see you. My name is Juha Kahila and I come from Helsinki, Finland, where I work at the Y Foundation, which is the 4th largest, biggest landlord here in Finland, non-profit one. We have approximately 18,500 apartments, which of 7,500 is aimed for homeless people or in the risk of becoming homeless. I think my passion to end homelessness has come from quite young age as well, going abroad with my parents and seeing people sleeping on the streets and asking a question, why don't they go to their homes? So I think my passion comes from there, and since that I'm in the same path, and hopefully someday I can retire and say that the problem has been solved, but long way to go.
A way to go, yeah. Look forward to hearing more about that. Fantastic. And Thuta, would love to hear more from you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about where your passion comes from?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me here today. Really lovely to be alongside great panelists. My name is Thuta and I'm one of the co-founders at Leho. We are a social enterprise and we sell super soft and funky bamboo socks that support the local homeless community. So essentially every single pair sold helps fund basic essentials like clean socks, underwear, toiletries, and also helps fund projects that support the homeless community. And I think my passion for homelessness, well, began kind of during my uni days. When, walking to uni as an international student, every day, we get exposed to people sleeping rough on the streets. And it was really bizarre to me to see that in a city like London, especially coming from like a third world country. I'm originally from Burma. You would kind of expect like a modern city not to have people sleeping rough. And when I did, I wanted to support, but didn't really know how. And so me and my co-founder, we met, and then we kind of came across the fact that clean socks are actually one of the most requested items of clothing at homeless shelters. And it's not only socks, it's like toiletries, basic essentials like underwear as well. And so we decided to, start our social enterprise in hopes to be able to fill that gap of essentials that are needed, but not enough donated in the homelessness sector. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Really excited to hear from you all today. So what I really want to focus on the talk is the solutions and what's working and what could work for homelessness. But to sort of contextualize things for people watching, it would be good to know, and Liz, this might be one relevant to you working sort of nationwide with St Mungo's, that what is the sort of state of homelessness in the UK right now? And a lot of things have changed pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. Has that affected it at all? And what sort of figures are we dealing with? Is it increasing or is it decreasing? And I'm sure it's not that simple.
Yeah, so the picture has changed significantly over the past couple of years. So concerningly, during from 2010 to 2017-18, we saw quite a significant increase in homelessness and rough sleeping in the UK. And that actually brought about the Homelessness Reduction Act to try and address this issue, which was new legislation that put duties on local authorities. So since that act was introduced and since the pandemic, we have seen a decline in rough sleeping and also a decline in homelessness. So during the pandemic, the government launched the Everyone In initiative, which St Mungo's supported. And what that did was it helped bring people who were on the streets into self-contained accommodation where they were protected from the virus and were accommodated by the local authority. And that proved to be a real game changer in homelessness. And during, because the Everyone In initiative, we saw a reduction of 39% in rough sleeping in the UK. Since then, we have seen, most recent data, we've seen a further 9% decrease in homelessness. And that's definitely moving in rough sleeping, and that's definitely moving in the right direction. However, that rate of decline is slowing. So we were at 39%, we're now at 9% decrease. And we know that the government has a commitment to end rough sleeping within this parliamentary session. So they want to end it by 2024. So there is still work to do, but we are moving in the right direction. And in terms of homelessness, which is different to rough sleeping, recent data has shown that we've seen, in comparison to last year's levels, an 8% fall in people homeless or threatened of homelessness. This reduction has resulted from a 20% drop in the numbers threatened of homelessness. However, we have seen a 7% increase in people actually homeless. So the picture is mixed.
Okay, and even with those rates declining, like you said, there's still a lot of work to be done, but especially by 2024, which doesn't feel that far away. One thing I did want to ask everyone here is, what would you say is the biggest misconception there is when it comes to homelessness, people who are homeless or people who experience homelessness? Lord Bird, I'll come to you first if you don't mind. What do you think the biggest misconception is around the topic?
Well, I think the biggest misconception for me is that most people think that people who are homeless because they don't have somewhere to live. Mm-hmm. My experience over the years, over the decades, is that when I meet a homeless person, I meet them with a cocktail of problems. And actually the presenting problem is the fact that they haven't got somewhere to live. So if you actually look through the years at the various government initiatives and charitable initiatives of getting people into flats and rooms and all that, a lot of them have not quite worked. I can say this from experience because I also raised a shed load of money with the Notting Hill Housing Trust back in the early 90s to get people in their homes. And actually they didn't stay, largely because they had a whole cocktail of problems. So, so what we have to realize is that when we encounter somebody without any accommodation, then what we've got to do is we've got to address a number of things at the same time. We've certainly got to remove them from the streets and take them to a place of safety. But we need to build therapeutic communities. We need to build the kind of support, what they call the wraparound support. Because if we don't do that, then we're leaving people suspended. And actually, in a way, we're moving them to indoor homelessness from outdoor homelessness or rough sleeping. So to me, rough sleeping, a whole myriad reasons that we need to address. And homelessness, it is rarely just a problem of not being in a home. But I have to say also, since COVID, we've had a new group of people who've joined homelessness who never have been socially prepared for homelessness, so to speak. And those people are people who have lost their jobs through COVID and have been evicted or have been promised or are waiting to be evicted. And that's one of the reasons why we started a campaign called Smash. I don't know what the words mean, but Smash Mass Homelessness. And that was to address the 250,000 people who in the COVID crisis were being presented with evictions, held back for a period of time. And we did manage to get some money out of the government, I think it was 360 million, to prevent this mass homelessness. The problem is the money has gone into the system, to the local authorities and all that, and it's incredibly difficult to find out if they've spent the money wisely on preventing people becoming homeless.
It's a really interesting point what you said about indoor homelessness, because it makes a lot of sense that you can't just treat these issues in silo. If people need work, just providing a home won't solve all their problems. But
they also need lots of support.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I talk with such authority over these cock-ups is because I've done them. You know, I've taken people off the streets, I've put them in places, and then I go and see them a while later and they're still in plastic bags. They still haven't. And then we tried to get them, you know, on detox and rehab and they won't go or something like that. So it's a real interesting phenomenon that most of the people we work with are very, very needy of quite deep social and psychological help.
Yeah, and that wraparound support. Juha, what about you? Are there any sort of misconceptions that you would say, and it might be different in Finland, that people have around homelessness?
Well, first of all, I agree everything that was said previously, and that is the truth. In Finland, I would say we have a quite good common sense what homelessness is, and I think where we differentiate is that I've been traveling a lot this spring to meet, you know, politicians in different countries and decision makers. And one question that has come up quite regularly actually is that what do we do with the people who chose to be homeless? And I find that question quite difficult to handle, because in our experience in Finland, nobody chose to be homeless. If you have the right kind of services, right kind of support system, and like said, you don't leave anybody just, you know, basically just housing. You need the housing first with the tailor-made support, wrap around it, and so that has been something that I've been thinking about quite a lot in this spring. That where does this idea come from that people chose to be homeless? So, and I always say the same thing, that if that's what you hear, then you need to look up your systems and services and how you failed to deliver the right kind of services that people want to access, and that way to get housing and the support on the right path. But yeah, I think those are some of the things.
Yeah, definitely. And Thuta, what about you? Is there anything that you'd add there? I feel we have covered a few misconceptions, but anything that you've come across that you would want to add?
I think the biggest kind of eye-opener for me, like as a student, starting off as a student, was just the fact that homelessness is much more than rough sleeping. You know, rough sleeping is literally just the tip of the iceberg, and there's so many different kind of ways you can fall into homelessness. And as you know, it was previously mentioned already, it's not necessarily just the fact that you don't have a house. Like, you could have a roof over your head, but you know, there's so many different ways of actually experiencing the actual homelessness lifestyle. So I think kind of educating people more about the different, you know, ways of becoming homelessness is really important. I think it's not just because you're homeless, it's not doesn't mean that, you know, you've kind of given up and you can't handle support. It's like there's so much more complications around it, and I think it's definitely up to kind of the service providers to be able to provide the right kind of support. And it's something that it requires like a collective effort between all the different institutions, whether it's healthcare, you know, job centers, and obviously charities and governments as well, in order to be able to tackle that.
Yeah, and you're right that it's complicated, because like Lord Bird said as well, it's different people's individual situations. We can't assimilate them all to be the same, but people are experiencing loss and stress in their lives in different ways that might cause them to be homeless. Liz, what about you? From the work at St Mungo's, is there anything else you'd add around misconceptions, or what you'd think you'd want people to know about people who experience homelessness?
I think when people think of homelessness and rough sleeping, they think of people who are most visible to them. And this is something that service is a challenge in services as well, is that there's that focus on people who are visible, and they're people who are homeless but are less visible, and they're called people who are hidden homeless. And so, for example, women may be homeless but may not sleep on the streets. They may be staying with a stranger, they may be staying, people may be sofa surfing, people may be in secure accommodation, and like Tuta said, they may have a roof over their head, but that doesn't mean that they're no longer homeless. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because in some areas that can impact on access to services. So something that St Mungo's has pushed for and advocating for is that you shouldn't be sleeping on the streets in order to access a service. You should be able to access a service if you are in insecure accommodation, if you are at risk of rough sleeping. And we feel that would have particular benefit for women who are, again, more hidden from the system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I can see how people have that sort of perception of this person's homeless because I've walked past them when they're sleeping on the streets. But that word hidden makes you realize there will be hundreds of thousands of people that we don't know about that are experiencing this. Just because we can't see them, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
And just to add in as well, what was really interesting during the pandemic is when the announcement came out that people who were homeless could be accommodated by the local authority in hotels, far more people came forward than were expected, because there were so many people who were hidden homeless that the local authority didn't know about. So the people that came inside were far greater than had been expected.
Because and it really and showed the reality of the situation, I can imagine. One thing I really do want to focus on is sort of the solutions and the actions, but Lord Bird, what would you say is the biggest thing preventing us from ending homelessness? Because it's not something that can be easily fixed, and it also takes a lot of decisions to be made that can't come quickly. But would you say there's one thing specifically that is sort of preventing us from ending homelessness that you would want to focus on?
Sorry, could I just refer, before you say that, to what Liz has just said, which is she shone a light on something really interesting, that the government, I think, was looking at supporting about 12,000 people, and it was 34,000 people that they had to house in the Everyone In. So that does show you about that problem of hidden homelessness. Yeah, you see, to me, I mean, I'm a bit of a pain in the rear to most people who are involved in homelessness, because my problem is that 10 years after the big issue was invented, I was asked by the Times newspaper, well, John Bird, for the last 10 years, you've been doing the big issue. What are you going to do for the next 10 or 20 years? And I said, well, for the last 10 years, I've been mending broken clocks. I've been working on people like me who have gone through a socialization or a desocialization that's led them to rough sleeping and prison and drugs and all sorts of stuff like that. So what I did was I said I concentrated on those people. But the next 10 or 20 years, I'm going to be fighting to prevent the clocks breaking. And that is one of the reasons why in 2015, I entered the House of Lords, because I realized that one of the big problems for all of the efforts that we in the homeless sector do, the governments can screw it up overnight. They can really undo the work that we've done. And therefore, we've got to make the box work. So we've got to, for instance, address the issue of education. The fact is, and I'm only basing this on my own experience, virtually all of the people I work with and have worked with are people who come from the same socio-economic section of the community. That doesn't mean to say that you don't get, ex-public school boys or university graduates ending up in homelessness. You do, because, drugs and mental health are the great equalizers. But the point is, most of the people that I've worked with and noted over the years come from the same socio-economic group. And that is, come from poverty, come from a family that has been in poverty, comes from what they call the working class or the underclass. I don't know what class they're calling it now. And so actually, if we really do want to prevent homelessness, we have to do something quite draconian around education and around the fact that we fail 35% of our children at school. And if you look in our prisons, or you look at long-term unemployment, or you look at the A&E department, or you look at people in the street, or people in homelessness, they are people who are the working poor, and they all come from the fact, most of them that I've worked with have come from the fact they've come from people who have not started life well, and they've started on the back foot, and they've ended up projecting that into certain problems. So until we address the class system, until we address all of those really big issues around social injustice, that just because your mum and dad are comfortable, you therefore are comfortable, we have to, in a sense, make the people who are stuck in the children of the working poor, who we have to address those people, and we have to help those children shine and aspire and move beyond poverty as far as possible, because poverty, to me, is the precursor of homelessness on so many occasions.
Yeah, and like you said, that the physical part that we can see is homelessness, but the problem starts way before that. So it's going back right to the beginning to address the problem, so it doesn't spiral into sort of that physical issue of homelessness. Liz, what about you? Would you, in terms of preventing the biggest barriers to preventing homelessness, Lord Bird just said there about poverty and education and starting earlier. Would there be anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, I would agree that the biggest barrier to ending homelessness is the fact that we need to be able to stop people arriving onto the street. So that's the key challenge. And I think to think about that, it's interesting to think about the history of homelessness services and the way they thought about this problem. So in the early noughties, the big focus and the big game changer was services should be going out and finding people and engaging them to come inside and to make sure that their time on the street was as brief as it can be. And the thinking has really evolved since then to actually, we shouldn't be aspiring to have people's time on the street to be really brief. We should be aspiring so that they never arrive onto the street, because once someone's on the street, it's much harder to find them and it's much harder to get them off the street. So in terms of how we get to that sort of approach, it is about stopping people arriving. And for that, what we need is more partnership working between different sectors. So it's about that join up, and it's about health, speaking to housing. It's about social care being involved. It's about criminal justice being involved. So it's all these different sectors which maybe historically have worked in silo, coming together, communicating, and ensuring those upstream interventions are happening, so that people can perhaps sustain accommodation, so that their needs are being met and they don't fall into homelessness, but also to manage risky transition points and prevent those transition points. So, for example, discharge from hospital or release from prison, or maybe a tenancy breakdown, and to make sure that we're catching people and having those early interventions before they arrive onto the streets. But to do that, the system has to work together, and collaboration has to be built in.
Yeah. And that join up of services, it's something that we've discussed a lot on these talks. We ran one about food poverty, and we had the director of a food bank in Bristol saying without the join up of services, someone will need to go to food banks, but then they might also lose their homes and lose their job, because it needs to be all working together. And I can see how the same issue is here, that you need the people working together to have, like Lord Bird said, that wraparound support and care.
Exactly.
Juha, now I wanted to come to you. So when we sort of came up with the idea of a Smiley talk around solutions to ending homelessness, we, in our research, saw that there are a lot of, and I know that we've discussed this, there are a lot of articles and things about Finland that have big, bold claims saying Finland has eradicated homelessness, around your zero homeless strategy. I also read that there's a strategy around ending homelessness by 2027. So there's a mixed bag, but it would be really interesting to hear from you where these stories come from and what the situation is in Finland. So people in the UK might think Finland, they've eradicated homelessness, they've solved the problem, but what is the reality like?
Yes, well, we haven't solved the problem, but I think we are on the right path. So at the moment, there are approximately 3,900 homeless people in Finland, and of those people, about 65 to 70% are sleeping with their friends or relatives. And basically, if you come to Helsinki to have a visit, you won't see anyone sleeping on the streets. So I think we have eradicated the rough sleepers quite well, and I think that's of course a magnificent thing. But I agree, there is a lot of work to be done, and I think the key why we have succeeded is we are quite pragmatic people in Finland, and we like to take action. We don't talk that much, but we like to take action. So 2008, when we started the housing first, I think we put it all in. So we renovate our shelters and temporary accommodations into permanent individual homes where people could get their own rental agreement and the support what they need into those apartments. And I think that was the starting point. And since then we have of course we have been building more and more affordable social housing, because we think it's the best structural prevention for homelessness, at least in Finland, and I believe in many other countries as well. And then 2016, we really focused on prevention on homelessness, and we started this new kind of housing advice services, which mean that if anyone living on a rental apartment or an owner-occupied apartment, you have some kind of issues with you cannot pay your rent, you have disturbances with the neighbor, you can contact these services, and they will help you get you through your problems. And it has proven to be a really good solution and service, because only in last year in the city of Helsinki alone, those services were able to prevent 4,500 evictions alone. So I think that has proven that you need to have these different kind of services inside housing first as well. But yeah, we haven't solved the problem yet. There are still almost 4,000 homeless people, and I know there are some people in Finland and also in Europe that say that 4,000 is nothing, but I think one homeless people is one too many, and we have zero homelessness all in all, then we can say job done and focus on the prevention side altogether. But yeah, on the right path.
When you came up with in 2008 was when the Housing First strategy started. What was that? How was that really different to what was happening before? What was the sort of difference in the strategies that sort of really got you on the move to ending homelessness?
Yeah, well, the number of homeless people had declined before 2008 as well, but long-term homeless people, number of those has stayed the same or gone a little bit higher. And the government wanted to try something completely new. We didn't know about the US housing first method at that time, so we came up our own idea of housing first. And then we started that the basic principle should be that everyone should have their own permanent apartment with their own rental agreement, and then we provided the support they need into their apartments, and that was the starting point. And I think it was really important that we renovate most of the shelters into these individual apartments, because back in 2008 we still had about 2,200 shelter beds, and now only in Helsinki, and nowadays we have 200 approximately. So we have been able to cut down the shelters and have more permanent solutions for people.
And so those shelters, they're not temporary; they are permanent residents.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So, sort of thinking back to the UK and what we're doing here, then. And focusing on the solution side of things, it would be good to know, and Thuta, I might come to you first, because you, along with your partner, have created this business idea through socks to support homeless people. When we're talking about solutions and what really works and what we could inspire people to do moving forward, would you say that businesses having this CSR aspect to them and really focusing on people as well as what they're doing would be a good move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Because in a CSR aspect, I think the more the merrier in terms of people supporting, right? And firstly, I think it's really important to be able to raise awareness around homelessness, because as we discussed, there's so many different types of homelessness, and so many helping hands needed in order to be able to tackle this problem. And so from a business point of view, I think we try to, we're not really experts in terms of, homelessness, but we try to help as much as we can in order to be able to help improve the quality of life for people who are experiencing homelessness, for them to be able to focus on more important things that will help them back on their feet, like, for example, finding a job or focusing on, finding shelter and things like that. And a lot of the people that, we run a lot of outreach services. So we go out on the streets and we distribute, essentials that people might need. And a lot of the people that we speak to kind of unfortunately choose to be on the streets as well, of course, due to affordability, but also when they are able to afford a place to stay, it's either not in the best condition or they feel very lonely, feeling isolated from, others, I guess. And on the streets, it's almost like a community. And I'm assuming that this is obviously only for people sleeping rough, but also it might be the case for the hidden homeless as well. So I think being able to have like a support kind of network and support system to help individuals feel like they're still supported and cared for even when they go on to living in accommodations is going to be really important. And we try to incorporate like different projects and workshops that can really help with the social aspect of kind of regaining independence as well. So what we do at Leho, we've hosted cooking classes that basically help people learn how to make easy, affordable meals when they do go onto their independent kind of lifestyles. And so those are the small things that we're doing as an organization, but I think it's replicable across many other organizations as well.
And it's becoming even more evident just in this talk how important that care is, like you help in providing cooking classes, but also a support network that people can go to so they don't feel like they need to stay out on the streets to have that support. Lord Bird, what about you? When it comes to solutions that you would like to see or that you think really work, what would you like to see? So I know your the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill is it in the House of Commons? Is this something that you think could make long-term change for people who experience homelessness?
Well, the Wellbeing of Future Generations bills passed through the Commons, Lords and the Commons. And it didn't get into legislation, but parts of it have been looked at by government departments. So in some sort of way, what we're trying to do is change the way what now is called the Levelling Up Department is working, how it deals with people in homelessness and people in need, people who, in a sense, are being prepared to slip into homelessness. So, so the bill, in a way, which is now coming back into Parliament, and will probably be coming in the next, year in and year out, because it's not simply getting it on the legislation, getting it into the statute books. It's about changing politicians and changing the way that they work. Because you see, most politicians work on the basis of emergency, and they work very, very short term. And what the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill is to get them to think in a longer term sort of way, and try and, in a sense, remove all of the ingredients that bring people to homelessness and to destitution. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. I personally believe that rough sleeping, if we're talking about that aspect of homelessness, is a human rights abuse. I've never met anybody on the street. I have met some people who've elected to be on the streets. I've never met anybody on the streets who is capable of looking after themselves in a way that will improve their sense of well-being. So I would like to look at creating places off the streets so that we can put people in these creative therapeutic communities and look at the reasons why people become homeless and end up on the streets. But overall, we are not doing particularly well as a society and as a political force, because we don't prevent. We spend virtually all of the money, 80% of social intervention money is spent on the emergency. Now, if you keep spending on the emergency, then what actually happens is you don't reduce the size of the emergency, because you're not dealing with getting people out of poverty, getting people out of need. And actually the way that social security is used, social security is not used to give people a sense of security so that they can move on out of poverty. It's used really as a holding mechanism to keep people. So there's an enormous, we really do have to reinvent the way that we intervene in the lives of people in need. And I don't see that there's much appetite for creating a whole slew of preventers, because all of the money really goes into emergency. All the big money goes into emergency. The Treasury is always being petitioned by charities and by government to spend more money on topping up and making people in poverty a little bit more comfortable. But not the same ambition is there to prevent people from becoming poor in the first instance. And that's why I go back to the education department. Education, we spend £50 billion a year on education. We spend nearly £200 million a year on health. We spend £212 billion on social support. So actually, if you put it all together, about a third to 40% of government's intake of its income is spent on trying to make ends meet around poverty. But very little of that is spent on preventing it. And if you look at the miserable size of money we spend on prisons, 5 billion. If we spent 10 billion, then we could do what the prison service did for me, which was educate me. Every time I got nicked, I got educated. I learned to read and write in a boys' prison at the age of 16. All these sorts of things. You go in bad now and you come out worse because there is no rehabilitation. There's some real dumbass thinking. And, the budgets are minuscule when you look at the fact that if you don't help people out of poverty, then you do have 50% of the NHS bill is spent on trying to keep poor people with food poverty issues, trying to keep them healthy. And 40% of our education bill and our social security bill is spent on just kind of holding people's hands. And that is because we have not made the enormous investment that we need to make in the early stages of people's lives.
And that early intervention, I can see, and even more as this talk has gone on, how key that early intervention is, the education and the awareness that that's the issue that we need to draw attention towards. Liz, what about you when it comes to sort of solutions that you think could really work, that need to happen, that you want to happen, or that St Mungo's as a charity is sort of campaigning to happen? Is there anything that you'd add there?
I would just add that because people who experience homelessness have a range of needs, we are going to need a range of solutions in order to address it. So there won't be a silver bullet, and each person is unique and needs a different support package. So some of the things that we've been innovating and pushing for at St Mungo's is, again, a move towards a preventative approach. So we've been piloting, we've delivered services for a couple of years now where people don't need to be sleeping rough in order to access them. And a really interesting finding is that we found that the people who use those services are younger than the people who use other services where you need to sleep rough. So that's a really interesting finding, in that we're reaching people further upstream, which is definitely what we need to be doing. Another thing is working, integrating our services with criminal justice services, with health, so that we're preventing people from becoming unwell and dropping into homelessness, but also at the same time bringing people, managing those transition points and bringing people off the streets. So what they found during the Everyone In initiative during the pandemic is that by integrating health into homelessness services, they are able to bring people inside and keep them in accommodation who'd been on the streets for years. Another solution is that there are people who are homeless due to their immigration status. So there are people with unclear or limited entitlements, and that means that they don't have recourse to public funds. And so for this particular group, what's needed is immigration advice. There needs to be employment support, but crucially, there does also need to be a change in the government's approach, so that people who are at risk of destitution, they are able to access public funds, because we're not going to end rough sleeping unless we tackle that issue. And then finally, something to briefly talk about is an approach that we've been innovating at St Mungo's, which is through care. So that's the idea of a navigator service, and it can be best described as someone who is an aunt or an uncle, and what their job is to basically work, sort of sit alongside someone as they move through services, as they navigate services, and coordinate that wraparound support. So it's an approach which is particularly targeted at people with complex needs, maybe who don't have that network who can do that for them, that would happen if someone had particularly high support needs in a family. So that's something that we've been trying, and we've seen some really good outcomes from that for people with high complex needs.
Sounds great. It's like what Thuta was saying about sort of people needing that support network, so potentially staying within their community, but having that, is it called through care, did you say?
Through care, yeah. So it's that intensive personalised support that follows that individual through their journey. So it's support that's attached to the individual, not to the accommodation.
Yeah, that sounds great. And Juha, I know you spoke about the Housing First sort of approach and how that is really helping Finland move towards ending homelessness. Are there any other solutions or sort of ideals that you're working towards in Helsinki or throughout the whole country that you hope to push forward to sort of get to that zero homeless strategy?
Well, we are lucky, of course, because our government is really committed to end homelessness by 27, as you mentioned before, and even the city of Helsinki, they are actually trying to eradicate homelessness by 25. So let's see how that goes. But I think because Housing First is the mainstream policy here in Finland within the homelessness work, I think we're going to continue that. And of course, we're going to develop the model further, and we have the prevention solutions that we're developing all the time. And I think one of the key things here in Finland is that how we see Housing First is that it's not only scattered housing, so we have different kind of housing solutions for people. And so, like I mentioned before, we have renovation renovate most of the shelters in Helsinki to these supported housing units where every people have their own individual apartment, but there is support on site available 24/7 if needed and wanted. But I think what you need to do is ask people what they want, respect their choice. And in Finland, we have seen that, all these people who are living in these renovated housing first units, they really want to live there. And, some of the people say they will live there the rest of their lives, and that's okay, even though if you don't need support. But I think we're going to continue what we are doing now and develop the model further. And I think that's the best way for us to go.
And 2025, not that long away. So
no.
3 years in Helsinki. Do you think that's obviously quite ambitious, but I think it's a really important point that you raised about speaking and hearing from the individuals about what they want and need to be able to sort of get there.
Exactly. And of course, the goal is really ambitious, but I think it's achievable for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one thing I wanted to touch on and ask all of you is, at Smiley Movement, we really try to focus on tangible actions that people can take away. And a lot of these subjects, we talk about issues that are so much bigger than us and that a lot of other people need to make changes to achieve. But we also focus on what individuals can actually do if they want to help, if they want to support. So how could we turn what we're talking today into tangible actions for people listening? So if we're focusing on individuals, if people are watching this talk and they're hearing about hidden homelessness, indoor homelessness, the need for wraparound support and care, and they feel inspired to act. Thuta, I'll come to you because I know this is something grassroots that you and your partner have done. What would you say to someone who is inspired to take action today, but doesn't know where to start, for example?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. That's really interesting because I think it comes down to kind of educating yourself and taking the initiative to really learn more about the different causes of homelessness and the different types out there, because it's a really complicated kind of aspect and area to learn. And then it's so hard to just say people become homeless because of this reason. So I think it's important to educate yourselves to learn more about different reasons why, so that in hopes, one day, if a family or friend or even a colleague seem to be kind of suffering or maybe looking like they need some sort of support, you can step in and prevent one individual from becoming homeless. So I think it's a very small kind of thing to do in terms of educating yourself, but I think it could be really, really impactful. And also, of course, like volunteering with local charities to really, learn more about what they do and see if you can offer any sort of skill-based volunteering that, can really impact someone's life. So I think those are the very top tangible things that I would say you can do.
And I know you said you had outreach projects with Laiho where you go out into the community. Is that something people can get involved in?
Yes, absolutely. So we're still a small team, but in terms of volunteering, we have had a lot of interest in people wanting to volunteer with us, and we are really trying to structure that side of our business model. And so if you're ever kind of interested in coming along with us, please do reach out. Our email is info@laiho.co.uk. But so we always go and then go firsthand, meet people on the streets, and really just it's a great experience learning about people's individual stories and just making friends as well. So yeah, we're definitely open to getting more volunteers involved.
Fab. And Lord Bird, what about you? For people who they're listening to this and they're watching and they want to take something away from it, how would you say we could turn this into, for an individual watching, turning it into tangible action that they can take, however small? Is there anything that you would advise that you think would be helpful?
Well, I think one of the big things we have to realize that when people fall into homelessness, they often fall into loneliness and they fall into social dislocation, alienation, and things like that. So one of the things that I've been doing, and the big issue I've been doing, is working closer within communities. Because if you have a local community that is working, and as was demonstrated in COVID, when the community works together, it inspires everybody to believe that you can change almost anything. So if we can actually bring together the players in the community around supporting people, and we've done it in a number of cities. Then what you do is you build a kind of safety net for people, so that if people have mental health problems, if people have drug and alcohol problems, or if people are, losing their jobs or something like that, there is a safety mechanism. I think we will have to go back to the community to help us support people in need, so that they don't feel that they're on their own, because most people who end up either on the streets or sofa surfing and all that, they often feel that they're lonely, they're looked down upon, they're seen almost as though they're a different species and not the same species as us. So you need to address those issues. But when I was asked by a group of students who said to me they wanted to get involved in the local, they wanted to get involved in social change and social support, I said, well, you've got to work out, where do you want to work? Do you want to work in prevention? Do you want to work in the emergency? Do you want to work in helping people cope? Or do you want to work in the cure? So we developed a methodology called PEC, Prevention, Emergency, Coping and Cure. So if you want to give money, or you want to give support in any way, and physical support as well, do you want to work in the very dry, kind of almost analytical world of prevention? Do you want to work in the emergency? And most people want to work in the emergency because it's, in some ways, it's much more exciting and it's more obvious, and you can see the results of your work. And helping people in the emergency and helping them in the coping is of major importance. I also say we should be fundraising for the frontline organizations. If you can do nothing else, support the organizations like St Mungo's, like Crisis, like Shelter, all the organizations who are doing, and they do not get the support. They're always chasing money, which is handed out, and it's always spoken for. If you give them a certain amount of money, they probably could do with a lot more, so that they could do a better job. So we have to look at it in different ways. We can't just concentrate on emergency, and we can't just concentrate on prevention. We have to support the organizations that are there, and we have to find a way of rebuilding our communities, even in our cities. And it does happen. I could tell you about all sorts of organizations that work very, very locally on housing estates, and they actually support people so that homelessness doesn't become a big issue in their lives.
So that's smaller people making groups within their communities to support people, not necessarily the national charities working in those communities.
Yeah, I think we did something in, I think it was in Northampton, and what we did was we got various players together who would never meet. We got estate agents working with the housing association.
Oh, I see.
We got a sandwich. We got the NHS working with the bakers, where all the people who worked in the bakery were people who were young women who had suffered domestic violence and were suffering all sorts of mental and physical health. And we got the local NHS buying the bread from this. So what you do is you reconnect, you rebind the community, and you help people. You don't leave them on their own. The last thing on earth is to leave people in this kind of weird world where they're so outcast that they have no sense of their own well-being.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to pivot quickly as we have 5 minutes left and we have had some really interesting questions. Lord Bird, this might be one for you as well. Someone has asked, what can be done to offset the financial risk to private landlords that would like to take in rough sleepers but can't afford to have tenants skip rent?
Well, that's, the rent guarantee system. I mean, that's kind of one of those very, very weird things, because in my opinion, private landlords who do make up, and I've met quite a number of private landlords who do make up, support, almost like provide social housing in all but name, and are very socially supportive. I think we've got to go around telling people about the best practices that are to be found in the private sector sometimes, because we can't all, there is such a dearth of social housing. We can't find these solutions just in public housing. We obviously need to build more public housing. We need to build more housing that is sociable and allows people. But we also have to pick out the private sector and look at the best practices and look at the organizations that support people who are in need. But, if somebody's not paying the rent, there's not an awful lot you can do about it, other than if it's because, and this is one of the major causes of people not paying the rent, is because of the length of time it takes to get universal credit, and the fact that social security sometimes is not very secure. It will be whipped away from you on occasions. And if you look at the evidence is that it's when people are in need and the support has not arrived in time, or has arrived or has been taken from them. Yeah.
And it's interesting, you were just talking about the private sector. The other question, which Liz, you might be able to take, probably the last question before we wrap up. But someone has said it seems that the government and NGOs and charities are leading the way in solving the issue of homelessness. But what do you think the private sector can do to help solve the issue? Would there be anything that you would add to that, Liz, to talk about sort of how the private sector could help more?
Yeah, I think the private sector has a really crucial role to play in ending rough sleeping and ending homelessness. And so at St Mungo's, we have a number of corporate partnerships. So our corporate partners, as well as contributing financially to the delivery of our services, what they also do is they look at what assets they have in the organisation and how they can be used to support our clients. So, for example, that might be partnering up for employment placement, so that we know that employment supports a sustainable route out of homelessness. So that's really crucial with that wraparound support for the person who's going through that programme. Also looking at what other assets a company has. So, for example, another sustainable route out of homelessness is if someone feels like where they are accommodated is their home and it is their house. So it's really important that when someone goes into a home, that it is equipped with a home. So it has a bed, it has a sofa, it has white goods, which can be difficult to come by. So we partnered with the white goods company who support us in that way. So it's just thinking about, I think it's about private companies thinking about what assets they have and what will support someone to sustainably end their homelessness.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, hearing from the corporate partners that you have. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to whip around all of you and just ask you to let people know if they have listened to this talk and they want to find out more about you or the work you do, where can they go? So I'll come to you first, Thuta. Where can people go to find out more about LAHO and get involved?
Yeah, so our website is laho.co.uk, and you can find out more about what we do and the impact that we've done so far, the charities that we've supported on our website. And you can find our email and contact information there as well if you'd like to reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Juha, from Finland to England, where can people sort of, if they want to find out more what you've spoken about, the Housing First approach, the Y Foundation, what can they do?
Well, they can go to our website. I think the name will come there on the screen. Yes, there is usaatio.fi. Please go there. There's a good English section as well, where you can find all the information that is available, how we have done the Housing First in Finland, and how it's possible in your own country as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Liz, what about you? What about people who would like to sort of know more about the work St Mungo's do and potentially even get involved themselves?
Yeah, so we're St Mungo's, so we can best be described as a before, during and after charity, so prevention, crisis and recovery services. Our website can be found at www.mungos.org, and that gives more information about what we do and how you can get involved.
Lovely. And Lord Bird, what about you? If people want to find out more about your story, about the Big Issue, and about the work that you're doing within the Big Issue group, where would you direct them to, or is there anything specific you'd like them to know?
Well, I direct them towards bigissue.com. Find out through the bigissue.com. And if they want to look at what I'm doing in Parliament, they can look at the parliamentary, look at Hansard, and look at the parliamentary website. And I'm very involved in that as well as in the Big Issue.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And for everything that we've spoken about today and the organisations, we have been live tweeting, so the information will be there for people to link to, go and have a look. But thank you all to you for joining and for sharing your insights. And for everyone that was listening, thank you very much. We hope you've taken away some tangible action or just some education and awareness raising within your communities. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.